Before we get into this episode, if you've been listening to Wind the Queue and getting something out of it, we appreciate it. And if you want to support the show, we've got a monthly support option set up through the link in the description. If not, just listening and sharing goes a long way. All right, let's get to it. Somewhere right now, there's probably somebody who remembers you from a call that you don't even remember running. To you, it was just 20 minutes. To them, it may have been the worst 20 minutes of their life. And someday, you're going to answer a call, climb back onto that truck, and never realize that was the last one. So here's the question. If you knew the next call was your last, would you treat it differently? Stay with me, because by the end of this episode, I think you'll look at the next set of tones a little bit different.
Boots hit the floor. Jump in our gear. Mask, gloves, door, screaming down the street.
Somewhere out there, there's probably somebody who remembers you. You don't remember them at all. Think about that for a second. Maybe you met them for 20 minutes, maybe even less than that. You walked into their house, their bedroom, their car, or maybe you met them on the side of the road. You saw them scared, hurting, embarrassed, angry, confused, maybe grieving. Maybe they handed you their child. Maybe they trusted you with their mother. Maybe they stood in the front yard and watched everything that they'd spent their entire life building disappear behind you. And then the call ended. You got back on the truck. You cleared the scene. Maybe somebody asked what was for dinner. Maybe another call came in before you ever got back to the station. And eventually, you forgot about them. But there's a pretty good chance they didn't forget about you. Because while that may have been your fifth call that day, it might have been the worst day of their life. That's one of the strangest things about this job. We spend our careers walking into moments that other people will remember forever. But there's something else I've been thinking about. One day, you're going to climb back onto that truck after a call, without even realizing it. You just did it for your last time. No announcement, no warning, no dramatic music. Maybe it won't even be a good call. Maybe it'll be a fire alarm, a lift assist, or a medical call. Maybe you'll complain the entire way back because dinner got interrupted. You'll get back to the station, get out of the truck, and never realize that was it. That was your last call. And that makes me wonder, if we knew which moments were going to be the last ones, would we treat them differently? Would we treat people differently? Would we appreciate our crews differently? Would we complain less? Would we listen more? Would we slow down long enough to realize what an incredible privilege this job really is? Today, I want to talk about the people we meet, the moments we take for granted, and the last call none of us will recognize when it happens. Welcome back to Wind the Queue, the stories behind the sirens. I'm Lieutenant Dodson, engine officer here in Northwest Georgia, and today, it's just me, no guests, no round table, just something that's been on my mind. I've been in the fire service long enough now to have accumulated a lot of memories. Most are good. Some aren't. Some are hilarious. Some I probably couldn't explain to anybody outside the fire service and have them understand why they're funny. And some I'll never forget. But what's interesting is the calls you remember aren't always the calls you expect to remember. They may not be the biggest fires, or the worst wrecks, or the most dramatic incidents you've ever been a part of. Sometimes it's just the person. Maybe it's something they said, something they did, or a look on their face, or a conversation that lasted 5 minutes. And for whatever reason, it stuck. That's what I want to talk about today. Because there are really two sides to this conversation. There are the people we meet, sometimes for only a few minutes, who will remember us long after we've forgotten the call. And then there's us, firefighters who go to work every shift assuming there'll always be another one, another call, another meal around the kitchen table, another night riding down the road, another opportunity to train, another chance to make something right. But eventually there won't be. Every firefighter has a last call, a last shift, and eventually they'll hear the tones for the final time. Most of us just won't know it when it happens. And I don't say that to make this episode depressing. Actually, I want this episode to do exactly the opposite. Because if we understand that our time doing this is limited, maybe we'll appreciate it while we're still here. Maybe we'll treat people a little better. Maybe we'll treat each other a little better. Maybe we'll stop allowing things that don't matter to steal our enjoyment of something that once meant everything to us. So today, I want to slow down a little bit. And I want to talk about what this job really gives us. It's not the paycheck. We know that. It's not the uniform, it's not the title, it's not the badge, it's the moments. It's the people, and it's the privilege of being there. And what we do with it while we still have the opportunity. If you've been in the fire service for any amount of time, you know how quickly extraordinary things become ordinary. That's one of the strangest parts of this career. When you're brand new, everything is exciting. The tone's dropping, you're up, you're listening, you're wondering what you're going to. You're trying to remember everything you've been taught. You're looking out the window, you're listening to the radio, your heart rate spikes, everything feels important. Then you do it long enough, and somewhere along the way, the extraordinary becomes routine. The tones drop while you're eating dinner, and your first thought might not be, someone needs our help. It might be, man, I just sat down. Let's be truthful. We've all done it. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, the station speakers come on, and before dispatch has even finished, somebody's already complaining. Maybe it's the third call since midnight. Maybe it's an address that you've been to 6 times. Maybe it's something that doesn't sound serious. Maybe you finally fell asleep 20 minutes ago. We're human. Being a firefighter doesn't magically remove frustration. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I've never been irritated when the tones drop. Absolutely I have. But here's what I've had to remind myself over the years. It's routine to us. It's not routine to them. We hear difficulty breathing. We've heard that 100 times or more. They hear, my dad can't breathe. We hear motor vehicle accident with injuries. We've run wrecks before, and they hear, my daughter was just in a car accident. We hear residential structure fire. Immediately we're thinking about size up, water supply, search, fire attack, ventilation, command, resources. But the person standing in the front yard isn't thinking about any of that. They're thinking, that's my house. That's where my kids grew up. That's where the Christmas pictures are. That's where my mother's jewelry is. That's where my dog is. That's everything I own. It's the same incident. It's just completely different experience, completely different perspectives. And I think experience in the fire service can sometimes make us forget that. We become efficient, and we should. We learn how to control our emotions, and we have to do that. We learn how to process information quickly. We learn how to move from one call to the next. That's part of becoming good at this job. But there's a danger in becoming so accustomed to emergencies that we forget there's still emergencies to the people experiencing them. To us, it's just another Tuesday. To them, it may be the day everything changed. And sometimes, the difference between a good firefighter and a great firefighter isn't what they did operationally. Both crews may have provided exactly the same treatment. Both may have stretched the same hose. Both may have followed the same protocol. The difference is one remembered there was a person attached to the emergency. That's something I think we need to hold on to. Because the longer you're here, the easier it becomes to see incidents instead of people. There's something incredibly unusual about the relationship between firefighters and the public. Think about the amount of trust people give us. Almost immediately. A complete stranger calls 911, and a few minutes later, we're walking through their front door. Sometimes we're in their bedroom. Sometimes we're going through their medications. Sometimes we're standing in a bathroom with somebody who is completely embarrassed that they needed help in the first place. Sometimes we're kneeling beside somebody on the floor. Sometimes we're standing in the kitchen while an entire family is scared and looking at us like we're supposed to know exactly what happens next. And we've known them, 30 seconds? 2 minutes? That's not a relationship. No history. They don't know our last name unless they read it on our shirt. We probably don't know theirs yet, but that uniform represents something to them. Help showed up. I think that's worth stopping on for a second, because after enough years in this job, it's easy to forget how significant that is. You walk through a door wearing a uniform, and people automatically assume you're there to help them. That's trust we didn't personally earn. It was handed to us by generations of people who wore the uniform before us. And every time we walk into somebody's home, we either reinforce that trust or we damage it. That's part of the responsibility too. People allow us into parts of their lives that most strangers will never see. Not the cleaned up version, not the social media version, but real life. We see somebody's home at 3 o'clock in the morning. We see dishes in the sink and laundry on the floor and family pictures on the wall and bills on the table and medication bottles lined up beside the bed. We see wealth. We see poverty. We see people who have everything and people who barely have anything. And one thing this job teaches you quick: money doesn't make anybody immune to tragedy. Everybody eventually needs somebody. We see loneliness. That's one that sticks with me maybe the most. Sometimes you get called to somebody's house and you start realizing we may be the first people they've talked to all day, maybe all week. Sometimes that medical complaint is real, but you also have to realize there's something underneath it. They're alone. They're scared. They don't have anybody. And for a few minutes, we're their people. That's an incredible thing when you actually think about it. We see addiction, mental illness, families fighting, families grieving, families coming together. We see people at their strongest and at their weakest. We see parents terrified for their children and children terrified for their parents. We see elderly people apologizing because they fell. That one always gets me. Somebody's lying on the floor, they can't get up, and they're apologizing to us because they feel like they're wasting our time. And I think sometimes we need to hear that apology for what it actually is. They're saying, I didn't want to bother anybody. That's when our attitude matters. Because we get to decide whether that person feels like a burden or whether they feel like somebody worth helping. You can walk around irritated, pick them up, put them back in their chair and leave. Technically, yeah, you did your job. Or you can talk to them. You can ask them how they're doing. Make sure they're actually okay. Maybe straighten something up that got knocked over. Ask if they need anything else before you leave. Same call, same outcome, but completely different experience. And that's what I mean when I say 20 minutes matters. 20 minutes is nothing to us. We spend longer than that deciding what we're going to eat for supper. But 20 minutes can be an enormous portion of somebody else's worst day. Think about a child, a kid who sees firefighters walk into their house. They don't understand all the radios and the equipment and the uniforms. They're looking at you, and they're making a decision in their mind about whether things are going to be okay or not. Sometimes the most important thing you can do isn't complicated. Get down on their level. Talk to them. Let them see that you're calm. Explain something. Give them something safe to focus on. Because if you're calm, maybe they'll be calm too. That's influence, and we're giving it immediately. We're invited into moments normally reserved for family. Birth, death, fear, embarrassment, pain, loss, sometimes joy. There are calls where you see people at the very beginning of life, and calls where you see them at the very end of life. And somewhere between those two, we get these tiny windows into people's stories. Then we leave. We go back to the station. The call is over for us, but it isn't over for them. They may spend the next week in the hospital. They may spend the next year rebuilding. They may spend the rest of their life without someone who is standing in the room 20 minutes earlier. That's where perspective matters. Because while we need enough emotional distance to function, we should never become so distant that we stop recognizing what we're walking into. I don't want to feel everything my patients or victims feel. You can't do this job that way. You'd never survive it. But I do want to remember there's a human being attached to every call. It's somebody's mama, somebody's daddy, somebody's child, somebody's spouse, somebody's friend. Even if they're angry, even if they're being difficult, even when we've been there 5 times already this week, there's still somebody. And for however long the call lasts, we've been trusted with them. That's why bedside manner matters. That's why professionalism matters. That's why patience matters. Not because it's written in policy, but because somebody invited us into their life. And sometimes we only get 20 minutes. Let's imagine something. It's been one of those shifts. You know the kind. You're 7 calls deep and it's not even lunchtime. You're barely back to the station. The apparatus needs fuel. Reports are stacking up. Training hasn't happened. Somebody started cooking an hour ago. And whatever meal you're pretending you're eventually going to eat is sitting unfinished. You've been trying to use the bathroom for 45 minutes. And then tones. Again, you hear the address. Maybe you recognize it. Maybe you've been there before. Maybe dispatch gives you something that sounds minor, and somebody on the truck says, "Here we go again." I understand that reaction. I've had that reaction too myself. We're human beings working an unusual job. We're going to get tired and hungry and frustrated. We're going to have moments when we'd rather not get back on the truck. The point isn't pretending those feelings don't exist. The point is what we do after we have them. Because this may be call number 7 for us. It isn't call number 7 for them. This may be the only time they've ever called 911. They may have spent 10 minutes debating whether they should call or not. They may be embarrassed or terrified. They may have been waiting by the window for us. And when that door opens, they don't know we've been running all day. They don't know we hadn't eaten. They don't know the call before theirs was emotionally difficult. They don't know somebody at the station irritated us. They don't know we're behind on reports, and frankly, they shouldn't have to care. Because for the next 20 minutes, they're ours. It's our job. I think professionalism is sometimes nothing more glamorous than having enough discipline to prevent calls 1 through 6 from changing how we treat call number 7. That's difficult, but it matters because every shift gives us opportunities to become cynical. We have frequent callers, non-emergency calls, people who misuse 911, people who are rude, people who don't listen. Every firefighter listening knows what I'm talking about. There are calls where you're thinking, you did not need the fire department for this. And maybe you're right, but here's the question. Can you still be professional? Can you still educate somebody without embarrassing them? Can you handle the situation without making them feel stupid? Because sometimes the call that sounds ridiculous over the radio looks completely different when you walk through the front door. Maybe the person isn't really calling about the thing dispatch told you. Maybe they're scared. Maybe they don't understand what's happening to them. Maybe there's something else going on. Maybe you notice something nobody else has noticed. That's why we show up. And even when the call turns out to be exactly what we thought, we still have a choice. We can make somebody regret asking for help, or we can help them, explain what happened, and leave them with a better understanding of what to do next. Sometimes that's success. Not every call ends with a save. Not every call ends with a dramatic story. Sometimes the win is somebody felt safe. Sometimes the win is they understood what was happening. Sometimes the win is they knew somebody cared enough to show up, and maybe that sounds soft to some people. I don't think it is. We talk all the time about professionalism in the fire service. Professionalism isn't only knowing your tools. It isn't only stretching hose correctly. It isn't only wearing your uniform properly. It's how you treat people, especially when you're tired, especially when the call isn't exciting, and especially when nobody's watching. And that last part is important. Anybody can turn on the charm when the chief's standing there. Anybody can look professional when the cameras are rolling. What kind of firefighter are you at 3 in the morning when it's call number 7 and nobody but the patient will ever know how you acted? That's character. And that's the version of us people remember. Here's something that gets stranger the longer you think about it. There are people walking around right now who remember you. And you may have absolutely no idea who they are. Maybe they recognize you at Walmart, or they see you sitting in a restaurant. Maybe they see the engine go through an intersection. And somewhere in their mind, they connect that uniform, that apparatus, that department with one of the most significant days of their life. They think, those are the firefighters who came when Dad got sick. Or, those guys were at my wreck. Or, that's the department that came when our house caught fire. And meanwhile, we may not remember any of it. That's bizarre, but it's also humbling because our involvement in their life may have been incredibly brief. For us, a run number, a report, a 20-minute call. For them, a permanent memory. That's why the little things matter. I want firefighters to think about that. Somebody may not remember whether you started a 20 gauge or an 18 gauge. They're probably not going to remember exactly what equipment you carried into the house. They may not understand why you made certain decisions, but they'll remember how you talked to their mother. They'll remember whether you explained what was going on. They'll remember whether you treated their home respectfully. They'll remember whether you looked them in the eye. And they'll absolutely remember if you acted like they were a burden. That's the part nobody likes talking about. We have an unbelievable amount of power in somebody else's worst moment. Not because we're important, because the situation makes us important. People are looking at us for stability. If we're calm, they're more than likely going to be calm themselves. They're going to believe that things are under control. If we're respectful, they feel respected. If we act irritated, they feel like they're part of the problem. Sometimes that lasts. Think about your own life. Think about times you've been scared or vulnerable, and somebody treated you exceptionally well. You remember that. You probably remember somebody treating you poorly too. Firefighters aren't exempt from that. We become part of people's stories, whether we want to or not. Sometimes people come back to the station years later. Maybe they bring cookies, maybe a thank you card, maybe they just want to shake somebody's hand. And sometimes the firefighter they're looking for doesn't even remember the call. I've always thought there's something beautiful about that because it means we can have an impact without ever realizing it. But there's responsibility in that too. The public doesn't separate us as much as we separate ourselves. They don't always think that one firefighter was rude. Sometimes they think that fire department was rude. One person represents the crew. The crew represents the department. The department represents the profession. That's why reputation matters. Not social media reputation, real reputation. What people say about firefighters when no firefighter is standing there. Did they help? Were they kind? Were they professional? Did they make a horrible day a little easier? That's the standard. And I think sometimes we need to remember that the most meaningful thing we do on a call may never make the report. There's no checkbox for set beside scared family member. There's no narrative code for made elderly patient laugh. No statistics for treated somebody with dignity. But those things count. They count to the people we serve, and sometimes they're what people remember most. Now let's turn the whole thing around, because we remember people too. Not everybody. We couldn't. After enough years in the fire service, calls just start running together. Addresses blend together. Names disappear. You can drive past a house and suddenly think, I've been in there, and then spend 5 minutes trying to remember why. If we remembered every face, every address, every conversation, every difficult moment with perfect clarity, I don't know that anybody could stay in this profession very long. Some things fade. Maybe they need to. But then there are people who stay. And this is the part I've always found fascinating. They're not always connected to your worst calls. Sometimes they are. But sometimes it's something completely ordinary. An elderly lady who you made laugh. A kid who was fascinated by the fire truck. A patient who reminded you of somebody in your own family. Someone who said something you weren't expecting. A person who looked at you differently than everyone else that day. Sometimes the memory isn't even dramatic. It's just there. Years later, you can still picture the room. You remember what time of the day it felt like. You remember something somebody said. Why? I don't know. Maybe our brains recognize moments before we do. Maybe certain people hit us at exactly the right time in our own lives. Maybe somebody reminds us that this job is about more than just emergencies. And sometimes we remember people because we never learned the ending of the story. I think that's one of the strangest parts of emergency services. We enter people's lives in the middle of the story and then leave before the final chapter. We transport somebody or hand them over or leave the scene, and that's it. There's no follow-up episode the next week. You don't always know what happened. Did they recover? Did the family rebuild? Did that kid ever walk again? Did the person you worked so hard on survive? Sometimes you find out, but often you don't. And every once in a while, years later, something brings them back to your mind, and you wonder. I think unresolved stories stick. Maybe that's part of why certain calls never completely leave, because in our mind, they never ended. There's no period at the end of that sentence. Just a scene we walked away from. But I also think we need to remember something else. Not every person we carry has to be heavy. We talk a lot about carrying trauma, and that's important, but firefighters carry good things too. We carry people who made us laugh, people who reminded us why we love this job, people who thanked us, people who survived, people who came back and introduced themselves, people who showed up at the station years later. Those matter too. We have a tendency in this profession to remember the losses and move too quickly past the wins. A bad call gets dissected for years. A good outcome sometimes gets a fist bump. Then we're available. Carry the wins too. Remember the people who went home. Remember the person who hugged you. Remember the family that came back. Remember the kid who waved at the truck. Those memories belong in the bag too, because if all we carry is the worst of this profession, eventually we're going to convince ourselves the worst is all there is. It isn't. There's enormous good in this job. Sometimes we just need to remember to carry that too. Now, after all of that, let's talk about firefighters. Because we can complain a lot. Man, can firefighters complain. We'll complain about things other professions wouldn't even know were complainable. Administration, schedules, overtime, staffing, policies, equipment, training, promotions, station assignments, who's cooking, who isn't cooking, who left something in the sink, who moved the coffee, why somebody parked where they parked, why someone changed something on the truck. And apparently, moving a Halligan 6 inches is enough to trigger an investigation worthy of Congress. That's the Firehouse. And honestly, some of that complaining is part of the culture. We aggravate each other. We vent. Sometimes we're just tired. But there's another version of complaining that's dangerous. It's when irritation becomes identity. When everything becomes negative. When nothing is good enough. When the department you once begged to hire you becomes the department you can't say one positive thing about. That's when we need to check ourselves. And listen, I'm not talking about ignoring real problems. There are legitimate issues in this profession. Bad leadership exists. Bad policies exist. Staffing problems exist. Equipment problems exist. People should speak up about the things that matter. But we also need to have enough wisdom to recognize the difference between something that needs to change and something that's simply irritating us today. Because if we're not careful, the noise starts covering up the reason that we came here. Think back to trying to get hired. Remember that process. Applications, testing, interviews, physical agility, background checks, waiting, checking your email, waiting, hoping your phone rings, waiting, maybe getting rejected, waiting, maybe trying again, and all you wanted was a seat on the truck. You would have cleaned every toilet in the station with a toothbrush if somebody told you it would help you get hired. Then years go by, and the thing you would have done anything to have becomes routine. That's human nature. We become accustomed to blessings. And that's why gratitude has to be intentional. Nobody stays excited forever. You don't need to walk into the station every morning like it's Christmas. That's not realistic. But you can remember. Remember when you didn't have this job. Remember the first time you put on your uniform. Remember the first time somebody called you firefighter. Remember your first real call. Remember how badly you wanted somebody to trust you. Now they do. Don't let nonsense steal that. Don't let a promotion you didn't get steal that. Don't let a policy you hate steal that. Don't let the firefighter who gets on your nerves steal that. Those things are temporary. The opportunity to serve, that's what you'll miss. I've talked to enough retired firefighters to notice a pattern. They don't usually say, I really miss the paperwork. They miss the people. They miss the crew. They miss riding on the truck. They miss the station. They miss the ordinary stuff. They miss the things we complain about. The things we complain about today sometimes become the things we laugh about later. And I don't want to wait until retirement to realize I had something good, and neither should you. Imagine this with me. The tones drop, and somehow you know. No guessing, no maybe. You know with absolute certainty this is the last call of your career. After this, you'll never ride a fire truck again. You don't know what the call is. You don't know whether it's serious. You don't know how it ends. You simply know this is the last time. What changes? I think about the station speakers first. That sound can really irritate you at 3 a.m. Would it sound different? Would you notice your feet hitting the floor? Would you notice the lights in the station? Would you look at your gear different? Would you take 1 extra second when you climbed into the cab? Would you look around? Who's sitting beside you? How many calls have you run together? How many meals have you had together? How many jokes have you told? How many arguments have you had? Would you listen differently when the engine started? When the bay doors opened up? When the apparatus pulled onto the street? Would the siren sound different if you knew you'd never hear it from inside the cab again? Would you look at your city differently? The streets you've driven 1,000 times. Buildings you know, intersections you could navigate half asleep. Would you notice them? Would you complain about the call? Would you be irritated because it interrupted dinner? Or would you think, I can't believe I get one more? That's the problem with last times. They're almost never labeled. Life is full of them. There was the last time your parents picked you up as a child. Nobody announced it, you just got too big. There was a time you played outside with certain childhood friends. You didn't stand there and say, this has been great, we'll never do this again. Everybody went home, life moved forward. There was the last time one of your kids mispronounced a word in a cute way that they used to. Then one day they started saying it correctly. You didn't know the last wrong pronunciation was the last one. Life changes quietly. Careers change quietly too. There will be a last time somebody calls you by your current rank. A last time you work with a certain crew. A last time you sleep in a particular station. A last morning truck check. A last dinner. A last training drill. A last set of tones. Maybe you'll know, maybe you won't. That's why I don't think the lesson is spend your career terrified that everything could be the last. That's miserable. The lesson is be present enough to notice it while it's happening. That's different. You don't have to turn every shift into a Hallmark movie. It's still work. Some days are bad. Some calls are frustrating. Some people will test every bit of patience God gave you. But occasionally, look around. Just recognize it. This is your career. You're in it. These are the people. These are the days you're going to talk about when you're old, and you don't get them back. I think we romanticize final shifts. We picture the retirement shift. Everybody knows there's food, pictures, old crew members stop by, maybe somebody decorates the station. The retiring firefighter walks out and everybody understands the significance of the moment. And that's a great thing. I hope everyone who dedicates a career to this profession gets that kind of ending. But not everybody does. Sometimes the last shift looks completely different. Sometimes the last shift looks completely ordinary. Maybe somebody gets hurt. Maybe a medical call. Maybe a medical diagnosis changes everything. Maybe they promote and never ride that position again. Maybe they transfer. Maybe family circumstances require a career change. Sometimes life simply makes a decision before we're ready to make it. That's why I keep thinking about ordinary shifts, because they're the ones we overlook. Let's imagine the last shift was ordinary. No fires, no rescues. Maybe 3 medical calls. Maybe a fire alarm. Maybe a public assist. Lunch got interrupted. Dinner was decent. Somebody complained about something stupid. You watched TV. You did a little training. Maybe you slept most of the night. Nothing memorable. Then the shift ended. You said, see y'all next time. But there wasn't a next time. What would you remember? Probably not the calls. You'd remember the people. You'd remember who was at the table. You'd remember something ridiculous that somebody said. Maybe you'd remember standing in the bay doing absolutely nothing important. And that's the strange thing about value. We assume valuable moments will feel valuable while they're happening. They usually don't. Most of life feels ordinary while we're living it. It's only in hindsight that we realize those were the moments. Talk to somebody who's been retired for years. Ask what they miss. A lot of them aren't going to give you some dramatic fireground story. They're going to talk about morning coffee. They're going to talk about station life. They're going to mention somebody they worked with. They're going to talk about the crazy things that happened at dinner. That's what the fire service becomes after the calls fades. People, it's relationships, it's stories. And that's why we have to be careful not to despise ordinary days, because one day ordinary is exactly what you'll miss. We use the word brotherhood a lot, sometimes too much. Sometimes so much that I worry it starts becoming something we put on shirts instead of something we actually live. But there's something unique about people you work beside in this profession. You live together a third of your lives. You eat together. You train together. You argue with each other. You laugh together. You get irritated with each other. Then the tones drop, and suddenly all of that crazy stuff just disappears because you're dependent on them and they're dependent on you. There's a closeness that comes from that. But here's what we forget. Crews are temporary. That crew you're working with right now, the exact combination of people will not exist forever. Some people will promote. Somebody transfers. Somebody retires. Somebody gets moved. A rookie gets hired. Senior firefighter leaves. And the chemistry changes. Sometimes for the better, sometimes not, but it changes. There will eventually be a last shift with the people sitting around your table right now. And almost certainly none of you will recognize it in the moment. You might spend that last shift aggravating each other. Somebody might get mad because somebody didn't take out the trash. Maybe there's an argument over what you're eating. Maybe somebody says something unbelievably off the wall, which, let's be realistic, it's statistically likely. Then the shift ends. And eventually you realize that exact crew never worked together again. That's why I say take the picture. You know firefighters. We'll take 400 pictures of fire trucks. And almost none of the people that we actually work with. Take the picture. Eat together. Stay at the table a little longer. Listen to the story you've already heard. Teach the rookie. Let the senior firefighter tell you how everything was better in 1997. And laugh about it. Because someday you're going to be sitting somewhere telling somebody, man, you should have seen that crew. And they'll have no idea what you're talking about, but you will. Those people become part of your life. Not every coworker becomes your best friend, and that's fine. Brotherhood doesn't require pretending everybody likes everybody. It means when the time comes, we show up for each other. And when we have each other, we shouldn't take that for granted. The longer you're in the fire service, the easier it becomes to become cynical. You've seen things change. Some changes are good, others maybe not so much. You've watched administrations come and go. You've seen policies written by people who apparently never expected anyone to actually follow them. You've watched promotional processes you disagree with. Maybe you were passed over. Maybe you watched good people leave. Maybe somebody you trusted disappointed you. Maybe you've had an officer who made coming to work miserable. Those things matter. I'm not dismissing them, but there's a trap. If you're not careful, the things you hate about the fire service begin taking up more space in your mind than the reason you loved it in the first place. That's when bitterness starts winning. And bitterness is expensive. It doesn't just hurt the organization, it steals your career. You start looking for what's wrong. Every decision confirms what you already believe. Every new firefighter irritates you. Every change is bad. Every good thing has a reason it isn't really good. Eventually, you become the firefighter you used to say you'd never become, and that's tragic, because your department can disappoint you without the profession disappointing you. Those aren't the same thing. A bad supervisor doesn't change the importance of the person calling 911. A bad policy doesn't change the responsibility you have to your crew. A promotion you didn't get doesn't change the fact that somebody riding behind you may still need your mentorship. Don't give temporary people permanent control of your attitude. That's too much power. One day, the politics won't matter. The promotional list won't matter. Nobody will care where you ranked in 2019. You're going to remember who you worked with. You're going to remember people you helped. You'll remember the calls and the laughs. You're going to remember the people who invested in you. That's what lasts. So fight the things that matter. Speak up when you need to. Advocate for your crew. Push for improvement. But don't become so consumed by the parts of the fire service that frustrate you that you miss the parts you'll eventually give anything to experience one more time. There's another group that belongs in this conversation, and it's the people waiting at home. Because we're not the only ones who assume there's another shift coming. Our families do too. We leave in the morning. We say, see you tomorrow. And almost every time we do. That's such an ordinary blessing, but we barely notice it. The fire service requires sacrifice. That's undeniable. We miss things like holidays, birthdays, games, dinners, family events. That's part of this career. But there's a line we need to understand. The job deserves commitment. It does not automatically deserve everything. Your department can replace you. I know firefighters don't like hearing that, but it's true. The day after you retire, apparatus will still roll. Somebody gets your locker. Somebody wears your radio. Eventually, new firefighters won't even know your name anymore. That's not disrespect. That's how the organizations work. But your family doesn't work that way. Your children don't get another father. Your spouse doesn't get another you. So if we're going to talk about appreciating the fire service while we have it, we also need to appreciate the people who make it possible for us to do it. Sometimes the best thing you can do after a shift is go home. Not physically, but mentally and emotionally. Just be there. Because it's possible to give complete strangers patience, kindness, attention, and compassion all day. Then walk through the front door and give your family whatever scraps are left. That's backwards. I'm not saying it's easy. Some shifts take everything you have out of you. But awareness matters. Your family shouldn't always receive the exhausted version of you. The fire service is important, but one day when the tones stop, your family is where you're going. Invest there too. Before we start bringing this conversation home, I want to spend a few minutes in a segment that we call Faith and Fire. There's a verse in James that fits this episode almost perfectly. James chapter 4, verse 14. Whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanish away. That's a humbling verse. We like to make plans. We like knowing what's coming next. Next shift, the next vacation, the next promotion, next year, retirement. We build calendars around a future that we only assume is coming. But Scripture reminds us tomorrow isn't guaranteed. And I don't take that as a reason to be afraid. I think sometimes Christians talk about the shortness of life and people hear doom. That's not what I hear. I hear urgency, not panic, purpose. If time matters, then people matter. If tomorrow isn't guaranteed, then today deserves attention. And that ties directly into everything that we've talked about today. Maybe somebody crosses your path for 20 minutes and that's it. You never see them again. You may never know the impact that you had on their life, but God allowed your path to cross. What are you going to do with that moment? Maybe your role isn't dramatic. Maybe you don't save their life. Maybe you simply treat them with kindness. Maybe you give them peace. Maybe you show compassion. Maybe you show somebody the love of Christ without ever preaching a sermon. Service is powerful because it doesn't always need words. Sometimes service is simply showing up when somebody needed you. That's what firefighters do. But this applies at home too, because we spend a lot of time talking about serving strangers. What about serving the people God placed closest to us, like our spouse, our children, our parents, our friends? It's easy to give the public the best because the role demands it. But faith calls us to live intentionally everywhere. If life is a vapor, don't waste every conversation waiting for a better one. Don't assume you'll apologize tomorrow. Don't assume you'll call your parents next week. Don't assume you'll take your kids fishing when life slows down. Don't assume you'll start enjoying your career when the next chief takes over. Life doesn't slow down. It moves, and eventually the opportunity moves with it. We don't know how many calls we have left. We don't know how many shifts. We don't know how many meals we have left around the table. We don't know how many mornings we'll wake up beside our spouse. That shouldn't scare us. It should wake us up. Use what God gave you. Serve, love people, forgive people, tell people that they matter. And when you're given another day, be grateful enough to actually live it. Sometimes I wonder, what would I miss? If somebody somehow told me today, that's it. You've heard the tones for the last time. What would stand out to me? Obviously, I'd miss parts of the job. But I don't think the things I'd miss most would be the things I would have predicted when I first got started in the fire service. I'd miss walking through the apparatus bay in the morning. That quiet few minutes before everybody really gets moving. I'd miss truck checks, and that's funny because truck checks are just truck checks. But there's something about opening compartments and looking at equipment, talking while everybody gets ready for the day. I'd miss the kitchen table. I'd miss standing around asking, what are we eating today? And somehow turning that question into a 30-minute argument, at best. I'd miss hearing somebody tell the same story for the 100th time. I'd miss knowing exactly who walked into the room without looking because you've worked with them long enough to recognize the footsteps. I'd miss the radio in the background. The bay doors, the smell of the station, the weird combination of diesel exhaust, coffee, cleaning supplies, and turnout gear that somehow becomes familiar. I'd miss driving through town at 3 in the morning. There's something about seeing your city when almost everyone else is asleep. Traffic lights changing for nobody. Empty roads, businesses are dark, and you're out there because somebody called. I'd miss the ride back after a good call. You know that feeling. Nobody has to give a speech. Maybe somebody says, "Good job." Maybe nobody says anything. But everybody knows we handled business. I'd miss watching younger firefighters grow. Seeing somebody struggle with something, then 6 months later, they've got it. I'd miss teaching. I'd miss learning. I'd miss the people. I'd probably even miss some of the things that aggravate me right now. That's how memory works. The edges soften. And that's why I'm trying to recognize those things while I'm still here. Because I don't want to spend 20 years after retirement thinking, I wish I'd enjoyed that a little more. I want to enjoy some of it now. Not every second, that's ridiculous, but enough. Enough to understand this is a season. A good one. A difficult one sometimes, but temporary. One day, I'll miss it. So while I'm here, I want to notice it. At the beginning of this episode, I talked about people who may remember us, even when we don't remember them. I want to come back to that for just a moment. Because if we're going to talk about the last call, there's one question that matters. What did we leave behind? Not at the station, not on the apparatus, but with the person. Imagine that your last call happens tomorrow. You don't know it. It's just another dispatch. You handle it, you clear it, and that's it. Your final interaction with a citizen as a firefighter. What did that person receive from you? Did they get patience and professionalism? Did they get somebody who listened? Or did they get a firefighter who was already halfway mentally checked out and back at the station? That's uncomfortable, but it's worth asking. Because your last call could become part of somebody else's story. They may tell it for years. That day when Dad got sick. That time when our house burned. When my child had the accident. The firefighters came. What comes after that sentence? That's part of your legacy too. Firefighters like talking about legacy. Usually we imagine something huge like leadership and training and departmental changes and promotions. But legacy isn't always grand. Sometimes it's somebody telling their family. The firefighter who came that night was really kind to my mother. You may never hear that story, but it matters. Maybe someone remembers that you covered their loved one respectfully. Maybe they remember that you protected their belongings while working inside their home. Maybe a child remembers that you talked to them instead of ignoring them. Maybe somebody remembers you because you treated them like a person during a moment when they didn't feel like one. That's legacy, not awards, not plaques. Not how many bugles are on your collar. Not how many people show up when you retire. It's the little pieces of yourself you leave behind in other people's lives. And most of the time, you'll never know they stayed there. The next time tones drop, I'm probably not going to think about this episode. Neither are you. We're going to do what firefighters do. We're going to get up, we're going to listen to dispatch, we're going to get on the truck, and we're going to go. Hopefully there's thousands more after it. Hopefully there are years left. More calls, more crews, more meals, more ridiculous kitchen table conversations, more fires, more training, more opportunities to help somebody. But eventually there won't be. One of those calls will be the last one. And we probably won't know it. So maybe the lesson isn't to spend our careers wondering when the last call is coming. That would be miserable. Maybe the lesson is to stop needing to know. Treat the person standing in front of you like they matter, because they do. Remember that the routine call might be the moment their entire life changed. Be patient, be professional, be compassionate. Appreciate the firefighter sitting beside you, because that crew won't exist forever. Somebody will promote or transfer or retire. Somebody new will be at that table. And then take the picture, laugh, tell the stories, teach somebody something. Stay humble enough to learn something yourself. Call home. Tell your family you love them. When you're home, be home. Let some of the crazy stuff go. Not everything deserves your anger. Not everything deserves your energy. Don't let temporary nonsense steal a career you once dreamed about. And every once in a while, when those bay doors open, look through the windshield, listen to the engine, Look at the people sitting beside you and remember what an incredible privilege this really is. Think about what happens when somebody calls 911. They don't get to choose us. They don't know who's coming. They don't know whether we've had a good day or a bad one. They don't know if we've eaten. They don't know whether it's call number 1 or call number 12. They just know something is wrong and they need help. Then we show up, complete strangers, and they let us into their homes. They hand us their loved ones. They trust us with their fear, sometimes with their lives. This is an incredible responsibility and an incredible privilege. Maybe you'll know that person for an hour, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 5. Maybe you'll remember them forever. Maybe you'll forget their name before the end of shift. Maybe they'll forget yours, or maybe they won't. But for that brief moment, your lives crossed. You had an opportunity to leave their world a little better than you found it. That's service. That's the job. That's why we came here. And someday, after however many calls God allows us to answer, the tones will drop for the last time. We'll put on the gear, we'll climb on the truck, pull out of the station, and none of us will realize this is the last one. Maybe it's a fire or medical call. Maybe it's something completely ordinary. Maybe you'll complain about having to get up. Maybe you'll laugh with the crew on the way there. Maybe nothing about it will feel significant until years later when you realize that was it. So don't wait for the last call to appreciate the next one. Don't wait until retirement to appreciate the firehouse. Don't wait until your crew changes to appreciate the people sitting around the table with you now. Don't wait until somebody's gone to tell them they mattered. Don't wait until the uniform comes off to remember why you wanted to wear it in the first place. We've been given an incredible opportunity. For a little while, we get to do this. We get to serve, we get to help, we get to show up. And that's something worth appreciating. So the next time those tones drop, whatever the call is, wherever you're going, whoever is waiting on the other end, remember this. For you, it may just be another call. For them, it may be the call they remember forever. And for either one of you, it could be the last. Make it count. Thank you for listening to Wind the Cue, the stories behind the sirens. Never forget how fortunate we are to answer the call. I'm Lieutenant Dodson. Stay safe, take care of your crew, and take care of your family.
Boots hit the floor. Jump in our gear. Mask, gloves, door, screaming down the street.
Before we wrap up, if you've gotten value out of this podcast, if it's something that you listen to, that you share, and that you believe in, then there's a way to support it directly. We've set up a monthly support option through Buzzsprout, and that link is in the description. Everything that goes into this, the time, the equipment, the production, it all adds up, and that support helps us keep this thing moving forward and growing. If that's something that you want to be a part of, we appreciate it. And if not, just keep listening, sharing it, send it to your crew. That matters just as much, but we appreciate all of it.